The morning sun streamed through the large airport windows as Mei Lin walked briskly through the terminal. Despite being the CEO of Blue Scale Technologies, a company worth billions, she preferred to blend in with the crowd. Her simple navy blazer, white blouse and comfortable slacks were a far cry from what most people expected a powerful executive to wear. The only hint of luxury was her well-worn leather messenger bag, a gift from her grandmother when she graduated college 15 years ago. Mei checked her watch. Still 30 minutes before boarding. Perfect timing. She never liked to rush, preferring instead to observe the world around her. It was this attention to detail that had helped her transform a struggling startup into an industry leader in just 8 years. "Coffee?" asked a friendly voice. Mei looked up to see her assistant, Ray, holding 2 cups. "You're a lifesaver," Mei said with a genuine smile, accepting the cup. "Everything set for the San Francisco meeting?" Ray nodded, pulling out his tablet. "The team will be ready. They're excited about the new direction." He hesitated before adding, "I still don't understand why you didn't want to take the company jet. The board practically begged you to use it." Mei took a sip of her coffee and shrugged. "How can I understand what our customers experience if I'm always flying private? Besides," she added with a wink, "first class is plenty comfortable." Ray shook his head with a smile. This was classic Mei. The boss who insisted on taking public transportation to work twice a week, and who knew the names of every custodial staff member in their headquarters. After reviewing a few last-minute details, Ray headed back to the office, while Mei settled into a seat near her gate, pulling out her e-reader. The novel she was reading, a mystery set in 1920s Shanghai, had been on her list for months, but between work and family responsibilities, finding time for pleasure reading was rare. She became so absorbed in the story that she almost missed the announcement for priority boarding. Gathering her things quickly, Mei made her way to the line where first-class passengers were beginning to board. "Good morning," she said pleasantly to the gate agent, extending her boarding pass and ID. The agent, a young man with tired eyes and a name tag reading Tyler, barely glanced at her documents before waving her through with a distracted nod. Mei walked down the jet bridge, feeling the familiar excitement of travel despite having flown hundreds of times. There was always something magical about visiting new places or returning to familiar ones. At the aircraft door stood 2 flight attendants. The one on the left, an older woman with platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, greeted passengers with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her name tag read, Diane. The younger attendant on the right, Preston, was busy checking something on a tablet. "Good morning," Mei said cheerfully as she approached. Diane glanced at Mei's boarding pass and frowned. "There seems to be a mistake here," she said, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "This says first class." Mei blinked in confusion. "Yes, that's correct. Seat 3A. Diane looked Mei up and down, taking in her simple clothes and practical leather messenger bag. Her lips tightened into a thin line. "Are you sure you're in the right boarding group? First class has already been called." "Yes, I just came from the priority line," Mei explained patiently, gesturing back toward the gate. Preston looked up from his tablet now, eyes narrowing as he studied Mei. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" he asked, his tone suggesting he was doing her a favor. Mei handed it over, maintaining her composure. She'd faced far worse than this in boardrooms across the country. Preston examined the document closely, then exchanged a meaningful look with Diane. "This first-class ticket," he said slowly, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a child, "doesn't seem to match your profile. Did someone else purchase this for you?" Heat rose to Mei's cheeks, but she kept her voice level. "I booked it myself, actually. Is there a problem with the ticket?" "Well," Diane interjected, lowering her voice to a stage whisper that passengers behind Mei could still clearly hear. "First class is typically for our premium customers. Business travelers, you understand?" Mei understood perfectly what was happening but decided to give them one more chance. "I am a business traveler. I'm the CEO of—" "Anyone can say they're a CEO these days," Preston cut her off with a smirk. "Look, we have a full flight today. Why don't you head back to economy where you belong? We need to keep boarding moving." A few passengers behind May shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but unwilling to intervene. One businessman in an expensive suit coughed and looked away when May glanced back. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," May said calmly. "Our supervisor is busy preparing for departure," Diane replied dismissively. "Now, if you could please move to the economy line, we have other passengers waiting." May considered her options. She could escalate the situation, demand to see the captain, call the airline's executive office where she had contacts from previous business dealings. With one phone call, she could probably have both these attendants removed from the flight. But that wasn't her style. May had built her reputation on grace under pressure and choosing her battles wisely. More importantly, she was suddenly curious about how other passengers were treated by this crew. If this was how they behaved toward someone they perceived as unimportant, what was the overall customer experience like? "Fine," May said simply, tucking her boarding pass into her bag. "I'll take a seat in economy." The surprise on both attendants' faces was almost comical. They'd clearly expected more resistance. "Row 24 is toward the back," Preston said, unable to hide the smugness in his voice as he gestured vaguely down the aisle. May nodded and made her way through first class, noting the empty seat, her seat in row 3. As she passed through the cabin, she observed how differently the same flight attendants treated the passengers they deemed worthy of respect. All smiles, and "sir" and "ma'am" and "can I get you anything before takeoff?" In economy, May found herself in a middle seat between a college student with headphones and an elderly man who smiled apologetically as she sat down. "Tight squeeze, isn't it?" he said kindly. "I'm Howard." "May," she replied, returning his smile. "Do you fly this airline often?" "Oh yes," Howard nodded. "About once a month to visit my daughter and grandkids in San Francisco. Used to be a pleasant experience, but these past few months..." He trailed off with a shrug. "What changed?" May asked, genuinely interested. "New management, I think. Cost-cutting measures, less staff, less training. The friendly faces are disappearing one by one." Howard sighed. "Been flying for 50 years, and I've never seen service decline so rapidly on any airline." May nodded thoughtfully, filing away this information. In her messenger bag, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out to find a message from her legal team. "Confidential. Acquisition of Aerodynamics Airlines complete as of 9:17 a.m. today. All paperwork filed. You now officially own a major airline. Congratulations." May stared at the message, then slowly looked up at the Aerodynamics logo on the napkins being distributed a few rows ahead. A strange coincidence that the first flight she would take as the airline's new owner would begin like this. She smiled to herself, tucking the phone away. The flight attendants had no idea who they'd just sent to the back of the plane, but they would find out soon enough. For now, though, May settled back in her cramped middle seat and struck up a conversation with Howard about his grandchildren, listening closely as the cabin crew performed their safety demonstration with obvious disinterest. She observed every interaction, every rolled eye, every ignored call button. By the time the plane lifted off the runway, Mei Lin had already begun formulating a plan. This airline, her airline now, needed a complete cultural overhaul, and it would start with this very flight crew. But first, she would experience exactly what the average customer experienced. She would watch, listen, and learn. Because that's what good leaders do before they make sweeping changes, and changes were definitely coming. May stared at her phone screen, reading the message from her legal team again. The acquisition of Aerodynamics Airlines was complete, the very airline she was currently flying on. She glanced around the cramped economy cabin and took a deep breath. What were the odds? After 6 months of careful negotiations, the paperwork had finalized just minutes after she boarded. She had kept the acquisition quiet, even from most of her executive team. Only her closest advisors knew about the deal until now. Aerodynamics had been struggling for years. Customer complaints were up, employee satisfaction was down, and their stock price reflected both problems. May saw potential where others saw only risk. "You okay, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost," Howard said beside her, his weathered face creased with concern. May smiled and slipped her phone back into her bag. Just some unexpected work news. Nothing bad. Howard nodded knowingly. My daughter's the same way, always connected to that job of hers. Works for some tech company up in San Francisco. Can't get her to put her phone down even at Thanksgiving dinner. What company? Me asked, genuinely curious. Blue Scale something or other, Howard said, waving his hand dismissively. Makes good money but works too hard if you ask me. May nearly choked on her surprise. Blue Scale Technologies, her company. What a small world. She decided to keep her identity to herself for now. I've heard they're a good employer, though. Good benefits, work-life balance? Howard brightened. Oh, she loves it there. Always going on about how the big boss, some woman from overseas, I think, actually cares about the employees. Sets a good example, apparently. May felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was why she did what she did. Not for the money or the power, but to create workplaces where people felt valued. Now she had a chance to do the same with this airline. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and May watched as the flight attendants began their service. Preston and Diane were all smiles in first class, offering hot towels and taking drink orders with practiced charm. When they reached economy, however, their demeanor changed dramatically. Beverage? Diane asked a young mother struggling with a fussy toddler, her tone making it clear that answering was an inconvenience. Could I have some apple juice for my son, please? The woman asked. And maybe some water for me? Diane sighed audibly. One juice, one water, she repeated as if the request was unnecessarily complicated. When the beverage cart reached May's row, Preston barely made eye contact. Drink? He asked flatly. Water, please, May said. And could I see a snack menu? Preston snorted. This isn't first class, ma'am. We have pretzels or cookies in economy. Cookies would be nice, thank you, May replied pleasantly, noting how Preston practically threw the package onto her tray table before moving on without offering Howard anything. Excuse me, Howard called after him. Could I get a coffee? We'll come back, Preston said without turning around, though May noticed he never did. May discreetly pulled out her phone again and opened her notes app. She began documenting what she observed, times, names, specific behaviors. If she was going to fix this airline, she needed details. An elderly woman across the aisle pressed her call button. 5 minutes past 10, finally, Diane walked by, reached up without breaking stride, and turned the button off without even acknowledging the passenger. Excuse me, the woman called out, her voice shaky. I need some assistance with my medication. Diane turned, her smile tight. I'll be with you shortly, she said, then disappeared behind the curtain to first class. 20 minutes later, the woman was still waiting. May stood up. Let me help you, she offered, moving to the empty seat beside the elderly passenger. What do you need? Oh, thank you, dear, the woman said, visible relief on her face. I need to take my heart medication, but my hands aren't what they used to be. Can't get this bottle open. May helped her with the child-proof cap and poured a small cup of water from her own bottle. The woman introduced herself as Vivian, a retired school teacher flying to see her new great-granddaughter. First time meeting her, Vivian said proudly, showing May a picture on her phone. Technology's not my strong suit, but my grandson insisted I learn how to use this thing so I could get pictures right away. May smiled. She's beautiful. How old? Just 2 weeks, Vivian beamed. Named her Lily after my mother. As they chatted, May noticed Preston watching her from the galley, whispering something to Diane. Both of them looked annoyed that a passenger was helping another passenger, doing their job for them. When May returned to her seat, Howard gave her a thumbs up. That was kind of you. Most people just keep to themselves these days. My grandmother always said that helping others is how we help ourselves, May replied. It was one of the core values she'd built her company on, and one she planned to instill in her newly acquired airline. Throughout the flight, May continued her observations. A young man with a service dog was berated for having the animal in the way, despite being tucked neatly under the seat. A teenage girl asked for a blanket because the cabin was cold, and was told they ran out, though May had seen plenty in the overhead bins during boarding. A business traveler politely asked about the Wi-Fi that had been advertised and was treated to an eye roll and a curt, "It's not working today." Each incident strengthened May's resolve. This wasn't just about her wounded pride from being denied her rightful seat. This was about a systemic problem that affected hundreds of passengers every day on dozens of flights. If this crew behaved this way when they thought no one important was watching, what did that say about the company culture? 2 hours into the flight, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we're hitting some turbulence ahead. Flight attendants, please take your seats." The plane began to bounce and sway. May watched as Preston and Diane hurriedly secured the cabin, neither bothering to check if passengers were okay or if seatbelts were fastened. They simply retreated to their jump seats and strapped in, looking annoyed at the interruption to their break. A young boy across the aisle looked terrified, white-knuckling the armrests. His father tried to comfort him, but the boy's panic was growing with each bump and drop. "Hey there," May called softly, gaining the boy's attention. "What's your name?" "Jin," he whispered, eyes wide. "Nice to meet you, Jin. I'm May. You know what helps me when I'm nervous on planes?" She pulled out her phone and opened a puzzle game. "This game. It's like a challenge. Can you solve the puzzle before the turbulence ends? Want to try?" Jin nodded eagerly and May handed him her phone. The distraction worked almost immediately. As Jin focused on the colorful puzzle, his fear subsided. His father mouthed a grateful thank you to May. The turbulence lasted about 20 minutes. When it ended, May reclaimed her phone with a high five for Jin, who proudly showed her the 3 puzzles he'd solved. Preston, walking past, noticed the exchange. "Phones should be in airplane mode," he said sharply. "It is," May replied calmly. "No signal, no Wi-Fi, just a downloaded game." Preston seemed disappointed not to have caught her breaking a rule. He moved on without acknowledging Jin's accomplishment or the fact that a fellow passenger had stepped in to help a frightened child when the flight crew hadn't bothered. As the flight continued, May's notes grew longer. She wasn't just documenting problems, she was formulating solutions. Better training, higher hiring standards, rewards for exemplary service. A complete overhaul of the company culture, starting from the top down. By the time the captain announced their descent into San Francisco, May had filled several pages with observations and ideas. She knew exactly what needed to be done. The only question was how to implement these changes without causing unnecessary hardship to employees who might simply be products of a broken system. She watched as Preston and Diane prepared the cabin for landing, going through the motions without genuine care or attention. They didn't know it yet, but their world was about to change dramatically. As the plane touched down on the runway, May looked out the window at the San Francisco skyline emerging from the fog. New beginnings, she thought, for aerodynamics, for its employees, for its customers, and it would start as soon as they reached the gate. The plane taxied to the gate, engines humming down to a whisper, as passengers began the familiar ritual of gathering belongings despite the illuminated seatbelt sign. May remained seated, watching the crew's reactions. Preston barked at several passengers to stay seated while Diane sighed dramatically at the overhead bins being opened prematurely. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco International Airport," the captain's voice announced over the intercom. "Local time is 11:42 a.m. and the temperature is a pleasant 68 degrees. On behalf of Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Chen, we'd like to thank you for flying aerodynamics today." May smiled to herself. Captain Rodriguez and First Officer Chen had no idea their employer had changed during their flight. None of the crew did. Not yet. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off, the cabin erupted in movement. May waited patiently, helping Howard retrieve his bag from the overhead bin. "You're a good person," Howard told her, patting her arm. "Don't see much of that these days, especially not on airplanes." "Just treating others how I'd want to be treated," May replied with a smile. "Hope your grandchildren are excited to see you." "Oh, they will be," Howard chuckled. "I always bring chocolate." As the economy passengers shuffled toward the exit, May noticed how differently the crew treated the first-class passengers who were already departing. All smiles and "thank you for flying with us" and "have a wonderful day in San Francisco." The contrast was striking. When May finally reached the front of the plane, Preston and Diane barely glanced at her. No thank you, no goodbye, not even eye contact. They were already focused on preparing for the next flight. Instead of exiting, May paused. "Excuse me," she said politely. Diane looked up, annoyance flashing across her face. "Yes, do you need something?" "We're preparing for our turnaround." I'd like to speak with the captain and the lead flight attendant, please. Preston stepped forward. Ma'am, if you have a complaint, there's a customer service desk in the terminal. It's not a complaint, May said calmly. It's about the future of this airline. The two flight attendants exchanged glances. Are you with corporate? Preston asked, his tone suddenly uncertain. Something like that, May replied. My name is Mei Lin. As of this morning, I'm the new owner of Aerodynamics Airlines. The color drained from both their faces. Diane's mouth opened, then closed without a word. I'd like a word with the entire crew, please, May continued, her voice firm but not unkind. Is there somewhere we can speak privately? Preston swallowed hard. The forward galley, Ms. Lin. I'll get the captain. May nodded and stepped into the galley. Through the cockpit door, she could hear Preston's urgent whispers. Moments later, a tall woman in a captain's uniform emerged, followed by a younger man with first officer stripes and a third flight attendant May hadn't seen during the flight. I'm Captain Rodriguez, the woman said, extending her hand. This is First Officer Chen and Flight Attendant Ortiz. Preston says you're our new owner. May shook their hands. That's correct. Bluescale Technologies completed the acquisition of Aerodynamics this morning. While we were in the air, she pulled out her phone and showed them the official announcement that had just been released to the press. The crew leaned in to read it, their expressions a mixture of shock and concern. I wasn't planning to reveal myself today, May continued, tucking her phone away. I was supposed to be in first class observing the service quietly. But there was a misunderstanding during boarding. Understanding dawned on Captain Rodriguez's face. You were denied your seat, she stated flatly, glancing at Preston and Diane, who suddenly found the floor fascinating. I was, May confirmed. But that's not why I'm here talking to you now. I'm here because what I experienced in economy class today was enlightening. May pulled out her notes and began to detail her observations, the ignored call buttons, the dismissive treatment, the clear difference between how first class and economy passengers were treated. She described Vivian's wait for medication assistance, Jin's fear during turbulence, and the general atmosphere of annoyance the crew projected toward economy passengers. This isn't an accusation, May clarified, seeing their defensive postures. This is a diagnosis. Aerodynamics has a culture problem, and culture always flows from the top down. The previous management created an environment where this behavior became acceptable, even normal. Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly. Morale has been low for years. Budget cuts, reduced staffing, minimal training. Most of us are just trying to survive until retirement. I understand, May said, which is why I'm not here to fire anyone. The visible relief in the cabin was palpable. Instead, I want to fix the root problems, starting with this crew. Flight attendant Ortiz, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. What does that mean for us? May smiled. It means I want to make you the face of the new Aerodynamics, a test case for what this airline can become with the right support, training, and resources. She outlined her vision: comprehensive customer service training, better scheduling to reduce fatigue, higher pay tied to passenger feedback, and a complete overhaul of the company's values and mission statement. The airline industry has convinced itself that treating customers poorly is inevitable. May said passionately that cutting corners on service is the only way to survive. I reject that premise entirely. My company succeeded because we put people first, both employees and customers. I believe we can do the same with Aerodynamics. First Officer Chen looked skeptical. With all due respect, Ms. Lin, the airline industry is different from tech. The margins are razor thin. You're right, May acknowledged. The business models are different, but human psychology isn't. People remember how you make them feel. Treating them with dignity costs nothing but pays enormous dividends. She turned to Preston and Diane, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. I saw how you treated first-class passengers versus economy. You know how to provide excellent service when you believe the customer deserves it. I want to build an airline where every customer deserves that level of care. Preston shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Lin, about your seat. May held up a hand. Water under the bridge. Today isn't about blame. It's about what happens next. She laid out her immediate plans: a week-long paid training retreat for this crew, followed by their assignment to the airline's most visible routes as ambassadors of the new Aerodynamics culture. Their feedback would shape the training programs for the rest of the company's employees. You have a choice, May told them. Embrace this new direction and help lead it, or take a generous severance package and find a better fit elsewhere. No hard feelings either way. Captain Rodriguez straightened her shoulders. I've been flying for 27 years. Used to love this job. Back when we had time to actually care for passengers. I'd like to feel that way again before I retire. Ortiz nodded eagerly. I'm in. This is why I became a flight attendant in the first place. First Officer Chen still looked uncertain but nodded his agreement. All eyes turned to Preston and Diane. Diane cleared her throat. I've been doing this for 18 years. It wasn't always like this. We used to have more staff, more time between flights, actual training beyond safety procedures. She paused. I'd like to remember why I chose this career. Preston was the last holdout. He looked at May for a long moment. Why didn't you just pull rank when we wouldn't let you sit in first class? You could have made a scene, gotten us all in trouble right there. May smiled. Because that wouldn't have solved the real problem. Making you treat me better because you fear me doesn't change how you treat everyone else when I'm not around. Something in Preston's expression shifted. I'll try it, he said finally. The training program. Can't promise more than that. That's all I ask, May replied. A chance to try something different. As the crew dispersed, to prepare for their next flight, which would be their last. Before the training program began, Captain Rodriguez lingered. Behind. Just out of curiosity, she asked May. If you hadn't been bumped from first class, would you still be doing all this? May considered the question. Eventually, yes. But experiencing it personally made it urgent rather than theoretical. Sometimes we need to walk in other people's shoes to truly understand their journey. The captain nodded thoughtfully. Well, on behalf of the crew, thank you for walking in economy class today. May smiled as she finally stepped off the plane. Sometimes the best view of a company isn't from the corner office. It's from the back row. 2 weeks later, May stood before a small group in a conference room at the Aerodynamics Training Center outside San Francisco. The flight crew from her fateful journey, Captain Rodriguez, First Officer Chen, and flight attendants Preston, Diane, and Ortiz, sat attentively, joined by a handful of May's executives from Blue Scale. This isn't a punishment, May emphasized, looking each crew member in the eye. This is an investment, in you, in our passengers, and in the future of this airline. The training center had been refreshed for this pilot program. Gone were the dated posters about safety procedures and corporate policies. In their place hung framed photographs of smiling passengers and crew members from the airline's earlier, more customer-focused days. We've spent the past 2 weeks analyzing every aspect of the passenger experience, May continued, gesturing to the data displayed on the screen behind her. And we found something interesting. Guess when customer satisfaction was highest in aerodynamics history? Captain Rodriguez raised her hand. Early 2000s? Before the industry downturn? Exactly, May nodded. Before cost-cutting became the primary goal. Before we started treating passengers like self-loading cargo instead of human beings deserving of dignity and care. First Officer Chen leaned forward. But the economics haven't changed. Fuel costs are still high, competition is still fierce. True, May acknowledged. But what if exceptional service became our competitive advantage? What if aerodynamics became known as the airline that actually cares about its passengers? All of them, not just the ones in first class. May clicked to the next slide, showing 2 sets of financial projections. This first model shows aerodynamics continuing on its current path, cutting costs, reducing service, treating economy class as a necessary evil. Profitability is modest but stagnant. She clicked again. This second model shows what happens if we invest in service excellence across all cabin classes. Initial costs are higher, but look at the growth curve over time. The line on the graph climbed steadily upward, surpassing the first model by year 3. Customer loyalty, May explained. Word of mouth. Brand reputation. These things compound over time. They're harder to measure than cost savings, which is why short-term thinking often ignores them. But they're far more valuable in the long run. Preston, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. So what exactly are we doing here for the next week? Role-playing customer service scenarios? Some of that, yes, May replied. But first, we're going to do something more fundamental. We're going to reconnect with why we're here in Terre. Hey, first place. She turned to Diane. Why did you become a flight attendant? Diane looked surprised at being called on. I wanted to travel. See the world, meet interesting people. And when was the last time you enjoyed meeting the people on your flights? May asked gently. Diane thought for a moment. Years, probably. Somewhere along the way, passengers became problems rather than people. May nodded understanding. That's what we're going to fix first, that mindset. Not with slogans or mandatory smiles, but by redesigning the entire work experience to make caring possible again. Over the next 3 days, the crew participated in a series of workshops unlike anything they'd experienced in their careers. They didn't just review procedures or memorize scripts. They discussed the emotional experience of travel, both for passengers and crew. They examined stress points in the customer journey and brainstormed solutions. They shared personal stories about their best and worst moments in aviation. Most importantly, they talked honestly about the obstacles that prevented them from providing better service. We're understaffed, Ortiz explained during one session. A full flight with 200 passengers and only 3 flight attendants? We're barely meeting safety requirements, let alone providing attentive service. The turnaround times are impossible, Captain Rodriguez added. 25 minutes to deplane, clean, and board for the next flight. Everyone's stressed before we even take off. And the computer systems are from the Stone Age, First Officer Chen contributed. Half our delays come from technology failures that could have been fixed years ago with proper investment. May and her team took detailed notes on these practical concerns. Unlike previous management, they didn't dismiss these issues as excuses or complaining. They recognized them as legitimate barriers that needed addressing. On the 4th day, they shifted from diagnosis to solutions. May brought in a surprise guest, Howard, the elderly passenger who had sat next to her on the flight. I invited Howard to share his perspective as a frequent flyer, May explained as the crew looked on in surprise. Howard smiled warmly. Been flying this airline for 20 years, he told them. Seen it at its best and, well, not its best. For an hour, Howard shared his experiences, the good, the bad, and the memorable. He talked about flight attendants who had gone above and beyond to make him comfortable, and others who had made him feel like an inconvenience. The thing is, Howard concluded, I don't expect perfection. I don't need fancy food or red carpet treatment. I just want to feel like a human being whose comfort and safety matter to the people in charge of my journey. His words struck a chord. After he left, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Preston spoke up. I think I've been part of the problem, he admitted, looking uncomfortable but determined. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing passengers as interruptions to my job rather than the reason for my job. Diane nodded. Me too. It's easier to keep people at a distance than to care about hundreds of strangers every day. But that's literally what we signed up to do. The conversation that followed was honest and sometimes difficult. The crew talked about burnout, about feeling undervalued by previous management, about losing sight of the human element of their work. By the end of the week, something had shifted. It wasn't just the new procedures they'd developed together, or the additional staffing May had promised, or the technology upgrades planned for the coming months. It was a renewed sense of purpose. On the final day, May unveiled the plan for what she called Phase 2. Starting next month, U5 will become our test case, she explained. You'll fly together as a crew on our San Francisco to New York route, one of our most visible and prestigious routes. You'll implement everything we've developed this week with the full support of the company behind you. Captain Rodriguez looked both excited and nervous. And if it doesn't work, if the numbers don't improve, then we learn from it and adjust, May replied simply. This isn't a one-time fix. It's the beginning of a journey. We'll measure everything. Customer satisfaction, crew satisfaction, operational efficiency. We'll keep what works and change what doesn't. Why us? Preston asked, the question that had clearly been on his mind all week. After how we treated you, why give us this opportunity? May smiled. Because transformation is more powerful when it comes from unlikely places. If the crew that once denied their CEO a seat can become ambassadors for exceptional service, that sends a message throughout the organization more powerful than any memo or policy. As the session wrapped up, May handed each crew member a small box. Inside was a gold pin, a pair of wings with a blue stone in the center. These are just for the 5 of you for now, she explained. They identify you as part of what we're calling the Horizon Initiative, our pathfinders for the new aerodynamics. Ortiz ran his finger over the wings. They're beautiful. They're also symbolic, May added. I want passengers to see them and ask what they mean. I want you to be proud to tell the story. Not of how I was denied a seat, that's ancient history now, but of how together we're building an airline that remembers the humanity in air travel. As the crew pinned the wings to their uniforms, there was a sense of ceremony to the moment. Something important was beginning. Our first flight together is in 2 weeks, Captain Rodriguez said, looking around at her crew. That gives us time to prepare, to get into the right mindset. May nodded. And I'll be on that flight in economy class. Not to test you, but to experience firsthand the beginning of this transformation. We'll save you a good seat this time, Preston said, and everyone laughed. The tension of the past broken by the promise of a different future. As they left the training center that afternoon, walking together into the California sunshine, they were no longer just a collection of airline employees. They were pioneers, tasked with rediscovering something the industry had forgotten. That beyond the procedures and policies, beyond the economics and efficiencies, air travel is fundamentally about people taking care of other people at 35,000 feet. And that, Mee reflected as she watched them go, was worth far more than a first-class seat. 6 months later, Mee sat in her office at Bluescale headquarters, reviewing the quarterly report for aerodynamics. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the stack of papers that told a remarkable story of transformation. Customer satisfaction scores had risen by 47% on routes served by Horizon Initiative crews. Employee retention had improved by 32%. Most surprisingly to industry analysts, profitability on those routes had increased by 18%, despite the additional investment in staffing and training. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Ray, her assistant, poked his head in. "Your car is ready," he reminded her. "Flight's in 3 hours," May nodded, gathering her things. "The quarterly report looks good," she told him, sliding the papers into her bag. "Better than good," Ray replied with a grin. "The board is thrilled. Industry publications are calling it the aerodynamics miracle. There's talk of airline industry awards." May waved away the praise. "The real miracle is that it took so long for someone to realize that treating humans like humans is good business." On the drive to the airport, May reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. After the initial test phase with Captain Rodriguez's crew, the Horizon Initiative had expanded to include 20 crews serving routes across the country. The distinctive gold wings had become a symbol passengers looked for when boarding, a promise of a different kind of flight experience. Not everything had gone smoothly. Some longtime employees had resisted the changes, preferring the old ways of doing things. A few had taken the severance package rather than adapt. The costs of additional training and staffing had initially concerned shareholders, but as the data rolled in, the strategy proved itself. At the airport, May checked in for her flight to Chicago, where she would be speaking at an industry conference about the transformation of aerodynamics. The check-in agent didn't recognize her. May preferred it that way, experiencing the airline as any customer would. "Window or aisle?" the agent asked pleasantly. "Window, please," May replied. The agent tapped at her keyboard, then looked up with a smile. "You're all set, Ms. Lin. Boarding starts in about an hour at gate B12. May thanked her and headed toward security. The airport was crowded, as usual, but she noticed something different about the aerodynamics gate areas as she walked past. The staff seemed more engaged, the passengers less stressed. Small changes in layout and procedure had made a big difference in the overall atmosphere. At her gate, May settled into a seat and pulled out her notes for the upcoming speech. She was so absorbed in her work that she almost didn't notice when someone sat down beside her. "Fancy meeting you here," said a familiar voice. May looked up to see Diane, the flight attendant from that fateful first flight. She was in uniform, the gold Horizon wings gleaming on her lapel. "Diane, are you working my flight to Chicago?" Diane nodded, smiling. "The whole original crew is. Captain Rodriguez requested it when she saw your name on the manifest. We thought it would be fitting for your big speech about the company's transformation. How are things going?" May asked, genuinely curious. "Different," Diane replied thoughtfully. "Better, mostly. Hard sometimes, but in a good way. It's exhausting to care, you know, but it's also fulfilling." She paused, then added, "Preston was selected to train new hires last month. Can you believe it? He's actually brilliant at explaining the philosophy behind the changes." May laughed. People can surprise you. They sure can, Diane agreed. Like a CEO willing to sit in economy and not pull rank. When boarding began, May found herself watching the process with professional interest. The new procedures were evident. Boarding by zones rather than status, crew members actively helping with bags, a sense of calm organization replacing the usual chaos. Ortiz was at the aircraft door, greeting passengers by name when possible, making genuine eye contact with each one. He spotted May and gave her a small nod of recognition, maintaining his professional demeanor. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Lin," he said, just as he'd said to the passengers before her. "Glad to have you with us today." On board, May found her window seat in economy. The cabin had been refreshed, nothing extravagant but clean, well-maintained, with small touches that made a difference. The safety cards had been redesigned to be clearer and more engaging. The seat pocket contained a simple welcome note with the names of the crew members on that flight. Preston was working her section of the cabin. When he reached her row, he smiled, a genuine smile, not the forced one she remembered from their first encounter. "Good to see you again, Ms. Lin," he said low enough that other passengers couldn't hear. "Economy treating you well these days?" "Much better, thanks," she replied with a wink. After takeoff, the difference in service was striking. The crew moved through the cabin with purpose and attention. Call buttons were answered promptly. Diane knelt down to be at eye level when speaking with an elderly passenger. Ortiz remembered a child's name from the boarding process and asked about her stuffed animal. None of it was elaborate or expensive. There were no free giveaways or luxury amenities in economy, just humans treating other humans with genuine care and respect. The basics done exceptionally well. Midway through the flight, Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising at 36,000 feet with clear skies ahead. I wanted to take a moment to thank you for choosing aerodynamics today. 6 months ago, we began a journey to redefine what air travel could be. Many of you have been with us through that journey, and we're grateful for your support and feedback." There was a pause. Then, "If you've noticed a difference in your experience today, if you felt more valued as a customer, I hope you'll share that with others. We believe that air travel doesn't have to be something to endure. It can be something to enjoy regardless of which cabin you're seated in." May smiled to herself. Captain Rodriguez had come a long way from the burned-out, just waiting for retirement pilot she'd met 6 months ago. They all had. As the flight progressed, May observed the crew handling several challenging situations with grace. A spilled drink, a passenger feeling ill, a missed connection that needed rebooking. The problems hadn't disappeared, but the approach to solving them had fundamentally changed. Near the end of the flight, Preston paused by May's seat during a quiet moment. "I never properly apologized," he said quietly, "for that first day when we wouldn't let you sit in first class. It was wrong and I'm sorry." "Water under the bridge," May assured him. "It led to something important." Preston nodded. "Changed my life, honestly. I was planning to quit within the year. Didn't even like my job anymore. Now," he touched the gold wings on his uniform, "now I'm proud of what I do." After landing in Chicago, May waited until most passengers had deplaned before approaching the cockpit door where the crew was gathered. "Thank you all," she said simply. That was exactly what air travel should be. Captain Rodriguez smiled. "Just doing our jobs, Ms. Lin." "Exactly," May replied. "And doing them exceptionally well." As she walked through the terminal toward her connection, May spotted Howard, the elderly passenger from her original flight, sitting at a gate with his familiar worn leather bag. "Howard," she called, changing direction to greet him. "Well, if it isn't the airline lady," he exclaimed, standing to shake her hand. "On your way to that big conference my daughter told me about?" May nodded, surprised. "Your daughter knows about the conference?" "Of course. She works for you, remember? At Bluescale? She's very proud of what you've done with aerodynamics. Says it's all anyone in the industry talks about these days." May laughed at the coincidence. Small world. "How was your flight today?" Howard's face lit up. "Best flight I've had in years. Young man named Ortiz remembered me from a flight last month. Upgraded me to an exit row for the extra legroom. Said it was part of their new Familiar Faces program for regular customers." May hadn't heard of this program. Ortiz and the crew had apparently taken initiative beyond the official policies. Exactly the kind of ownership she'd hoped to inspire. "I'm glad to hear it," she said. That's exactly what we're trying to create. Howard studied her face. You know, when my daughter first told me her boss had bought an airline, I thought it was just another business deal. But you're really trying to change things, aren't you? May nodded. One flight at a time. As she continued to her gate, May mentally revised her conference speech. The industry executives would expect to hear about metrics and methodologies, strategies, and synergies. Those things mattered, of course. The numbers proved the approach was working, but the real story wasn't in the spreadsheets. It was in Preston's newfound pride in his work. It was in Captain Rodriguez's message to her passengers. It was in Ortiz remembering Howard from a previous flight and taking initiative to make his journey better. It was in the simple, powerful truth that had guided May throughout her career. When you remember the humanity in business, everybody wins. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ray. Board wants to expand Horizon Initiative to all routes by end of year. Approval for additional training budget. They're all in? May smiled. The transformation was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, resistance to overcome, systems to rebuild. But today, on a routine flight from San Francisco to Chicago, she had seen the future of aerodynamics, and it looked remarkably like its past when air travel was something special, and every passenger, regardless of where they sat, was treated like a welcome guest rather than a necessary inconvenience. All because she had been denied a first-class seat and chosen to see it not as an insult, but as an opportunity to understand and ultimately transform the experience of flying.